It would be great to have a partnership with the district, meaning the district be able to supply that to the customer as part of a conservation program. And I think when we start looking at the technology, not only increasing its ability, but coming down in cost, those partnerships start becoming a reality pretty quickly. And on top of that, to help bridging a gap, there's quite a bit of grant dollars out there to make that happen, especially in today's environment, to try to make sure that water conservation is continued and progressed with technology as a partner.
Ranjiv, do you have something you would like to add? And before I let another interruption, so I'm sorry, but please be sure your microphones are muted if you're not speaking. Thank you. Go ahead, Ranjiv.
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer in the statement that you can't manage what you don't measure, and I think advanced metering infrastructure is an integral part of moving forward with water supply efficiencies. Not only does it allow customers to understand where their water is going, but I think as importantly, or more importantly, the data that is received by the district in real time with respect to water flows allows the district to understand conservation consumption on an ongoing basis, and identify the areas of the network that are the critical priorities for maintenance and improvement. So we have a complicated network here with MMWD. I think 900 miles of pipe supply. Very difficult to manage all of that. So in order to do effective maintenance, we have to understand where are the critical areas that require attention and prioritize that. With better data from AMI, it makes that much more possible. So I think in the long run, the investment in AMI will be more than paid off by both the efficiencies gained through leak reduction and the ability to target maintenance activities and maintenance funds.
Great, thanks. I'll add a few things. I do feel like a lot of the decision making at MMWD seems to me to be piecemeal. One-off decisions. We have an opportunity. All in favor, aye. Let's build a $3 million pump station. All in favor, aye. Yeah, of course, we need a $3 million pump station. AMI, let's get the data. $25 million investment in AMI technology. What I haven't seen is really a deep analysis of exactly where we're going to get the return, where are the opportunities, and how can we look at this kind of investment in light of a full budget and a full plan, as Matt said in the beginning. We need to start with a plan, have a very clear set of goals, and then fit the budget to make that work. I'm a huge fan of advanced metering. One of my first companies that I backed in the sustainability fund that I started was called Banyan Water. We have water meters that we put into large real estate irrigation complexes around the country, mostly in Georgia, Texas, Southern California, Arizona, where water rates are much higher. Corporate campuses and large campuses. We've proven that you can have a 60% reduction in water use and a 18-month return on investment. Now, this is low-hanging fruit. I do not expect the AMI investment that the water district will have here will have that kind of return. But measuring, as Ranjiv said, measuring success, measuring the impact of these kinds of investments is critical. It helped, we get our savings, and what I hope we would be able to do at Marin is to get the savings from early leak detection, figure out where you can dedicate your resources to invest in infrastructure before it becomes problematic, and figure out where the waste is and how we can be efficient. So I'm a giant believer in this kind of technology, and I know that there will be future technologies that will be successful. That we should investigate and continue, as MMWD used to be, as an innovator, where I believe that we've stepped a little bit behind. But I want to map that innovation with real clear analytics and real clear understanding of how we're going to get the best bang for our buck, given all the other options we have out there.
Thanks, y'all. There is one question from the chat room from April, who would like to hear about the pros and cons of desal. Matt, you're up.
Okay. So, the pro is pretty straightforward, the ability to independently supply our own water should we need to. And as we know, droughts do not respect jurisdictional boundaries, nor are they district specific. So when one's affected, most are, and that will impact the ability to get water from other areas potentially, especially when we're looking to the state supply, if that was going to continue to be an option. So having that ability to actually put that in there and be independent is a big pro. And I think there's also some pros if it becomes a regional system as opposed to just a MMWD specific system, and the ability to share that in the cost. But the downside, I think, it's going to be the cost, it's going to be the environmental impact, and it's going to be finding the right location to do that, because it's difficult. The bay is a different beast for a lot of areas, especially surrounding the North Bay with the Petaluma area, the San Pablo Bay, and then the waters that follow all the way down to Richardson Bay, compared to where other areas are. We do see a lot of success, or I should say we as in the Bay Area, but the city of Antioch and their system now, the way they're building it in terms of the cost, the effectiveness, and the ability to expand, seems to be like a pretty good process to follow. But at the same time, too, we have to understand the limitations of our area as compared to where they're doing before we can make any moves forward.
Ranjiv, anything to add?
I think it's helpful to put desal in context. So earlier I asked, why is MMWD caught in a cycle of water shortages? 80% of our water currently comes from rain that we capture in our own reservoirs here in the watershed. The other 20% or so comes from rain that's sourced from the Russian River. So MMWD has two sources of water. That's it. Both are 100% drought susceptible. So as long as we continue to have all of our water coming from two sources that are highly drought susceptible, we will always be in this cycle of water shortage. We won't get out of this. Now, Jed alluded to all the different strategies we have to address different our water supply diversity. But I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the amount of complexity there is across all of those different supplies. Do we focus on expanded storage? Do we focus on groundwater banking in Sonoma? Do we focus on interties? Do we focus on desal? And it starts to create this analysis paralysis, which is actually, I think, what's happening at MMWD. We're in the midst of a very in-depth study to evaluate the costs and benefits of each of these options. And it's a repeat of the study that was done in 2017 that did a careful cost-benefit analysis of each of these options. We've got the data. I think we need to start thinking about how can we complement highly vulnerable water supplies with sources that are drought resistant. And when you look at that, you only have two options. You have wastewater recycling and you have desal. Now, I think to the question, the benefits of desal are striking in that it's drought resistant. There are obvious costs, downsides, the energy requirements for running it, the environmental consequences of concentrated brine. But I think we have to start to look at that and say, are the technologies now at a place where we are comfortable with some of the environmental issues to move forward and make that decision? If we don't do that, if we don't move to drought-resistant water supplies, we will not get out of this cycle of water shortages.
Great. Well, you guys used a lot of my platform there, so I'll try not to be too repetitive. I think that the benefits are, as stated, to give us a real chance, a real shot at being independent and not reliant on sources that we can't control. And there can be a long-term cost benefit also. I think when you look at other solutions, there definitely are some financial benefits to doing it. To put a finer tooth on the comb on the downside, it's a pretty enormous upfront cost. However, I don't believe that the Jacob study analysis of whatever $350+ million was one that I understood. It seemed much higher than what I've seen in the past. But still, it's a pretty big upfront cost. It's also expensive to run these things. So, cost of rain is not that expensive. It's $300 an acre foot, and this is going to be more in the $3,000 an acre foot. So it's expensive to run it, labor intensive, and you have to keep it going. It also takes an enormous amount of energy. So if we think climate change is the problem, the amount of CO2 emissions coming from running these plants is enormous. And then, as they said, the brine and how you handle the waste. So there are a lot of downsides. The only other one that I think is going to be really tough for us is that this is probably the most polarizing issue in our county. I mean, the political will, the people that I've talked to and some on this call here, it's like desal is the only answer. And if you don't do it, you got, come on, you're out of it. And I get the absolute other side. I mean, I got people that are like, no chance, not going to happen. We'll picket the streets. And so it is a massively polarizing issue. And what I hope to do is just get the tenor down a little bit, try to get to the real issues and bring people together to kind of come up with answers as opposed to pointing fingers, and help people take their stakes out of the ground. I think the solutions are going to come from multiple places. I don't think there's a one-stop shop solution for everything. And if we take a short, medium, and long-term perspective on our water supply issues, then I think the solutions will become clearer. In the short term, an emergency insurance plan is not going to be desal. We're not going to build a desal plant in the next year. But we need to do some work in the next year. We need to do some really clear work to make sure we don't run out of water again like we did last year. So there's some immediate emergency work that has to happen. And then we have a medium-term plan, and I'm thinking that's more like 8 to 10 years. And that's where our goal and our goal setting and planning needs to come into play. So right now, the way I'm thinking about this, and this is the first time I'm testing it, is I want to see 2,000 acre feet in the next 2 years. And there are a lot of different ways we can get it. And I want to see 10,000 acre feet of water supply in the next 10 years. And how, if we have a goal like that, how can we then back into the sources and where we're going to come from? It could come from savings. It could come from recycled water. And it could come from partnering either in a regional desal basis or others. But once you have a plan in place like that, then we can bring together all the different solutions. And frankly, I think we need a 40-year plan. We need a long-term plan, and we need to start saving, because we're not saving right now. Our financial structure is such that we're taking on debt in order to pay for our current operating shortfalls. And there's some real concerns that I have about how we map the short, medium, and long-term plan into a financial model that works, given what drought has thrown our way.
Thanks, all three of you. I think the one thing I did make a comment at the last meeting last week about the threat to the infrastructure and this threat to the water supply through fire and earthquake. And within 2 hours of talking about that, there was an earthquake on the Rogers Creek Fault. So I think when we think of conservation and thinking of adding new supply, we have to keep in mind what happens if the wildfire or if the major earthquake hits us all. Chuck, I think you had something you wanted to add. Chuck?
Yeah, I just want to tell everybody, since we have 43 people here, this is for you guys. We've peppered these candidates with plenty of questions. If you want to raise your hand and your video's on, either way, you go to the reaction button at the bottom, you click on it, and there'll be a raise hand icon. But we're really holding this meeting to get questions from all our members. So please don't be shy. If you've got a question, hit that raise hand, or you can put it in chat. I know Christy's got her eye on one or two in chat, but feel free to get those questions out there.
And Baron,
one of our advisors, Steve Moore, has a question.
Okay, Chuck, thank you. Steve, let's go to Steve first, and then we'll go to Baron.
Sure. Thanks to the candidates for joining us, and very thoughtful answers, as we were not surprised. My question is, the incumbents have emphasized conservation. We all know that. But besides conservation, they've prioritized water supply solutions that require the cooperation and generosity of others. including Sonoma Water, East Bay Mud. And for long-term water security here in Marin, do you think it is wise to continue to put all our eggs in these baskets?
Ranjiv, why don't we start with you just to mix it up a little bit?
I think there's the balance, Steve. I think there are options that we can and should pursue that are within our ability to do so on our own. Wastewater recycling is one of those. Expanding storage capacity to the extent feasible is one of those. There are other options that we should be considering, and I think we should be very open to that. That will be more difficult to pursue on our own. The obvious ones, as you've noted, are developing links to the state and federal water projects in the Central Valley, using underground storage as an alternative to expanded reservoir capacity. If we are able to do that, it's going to be in Sonoma, obviously. And then desal. I think this has already come up. Will the costs and benefits, if we do decide to pursue that, favor something that we do here on our own versus something that's done on a regional basis? I suspect once the current study is complete, we will have fairly good data for making those decisions about how to move on each of these options. But I think in the end, my perception is that it's going to be a balance between local initiative as well as a regional initiative.
Jed, do you want to add something to that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. The relationship with Sonoma is critical for us. It's a big chunk of our water supply, and it does not feel like it's the most secure relationship. Larry Russell, Jack Gibson have had a lock on those conversations for a long time. And the sense that I get is that the political tenor coming out of Sonoma is not one of love for us. However, I do think they do appreciate our revenues, and we do provide some pretty important benefits. In talking with Jared Huffman and Stephanie Moulton-Peters last week, I do believe there's an opportunity for me and potentially all three of us to get involved in those conversations, to shift the dialogue around us taking from them. But how can we have a more regional approach? And I think we should. I think that water does, as I think Matt said earlier, go across jurisdictions, and these lines that were drawn were not taken into account of watershed. And some of the low-hanging fruit in talking with Ben Hornstein actually does come from a partnership that we can expand with Novato, that we probably can work with Stafford Lake, which gets 100% of their water from Sonoma. And we can work with either pipeline access or get access to store water in our district and have a pipeline that connects with Sonoma and Novato and us. That seems to be something that actually will happen. And I think that could be helpful. It's not the one cure-all solution, but that can be helpful. And if we can expand the relationship with Sonoma, with the winter water that they have coming through the Russian River, with access to their reservoir capacity, I think that we can share capacity in a way that's pretty innovative and make that a more regional one water approach. But once again, I think it was Matt that said that earlier, we're still reliant on rain. This is not a drought-proof concept. So these relationships are critical. They're critical right now. I hope to strengthen them and not run away from them. I hope to bring goodwill to both our community and theirs. And in a way, if we can invest in them, then I think that we will benefit and we can make them more solid. But the ways that we can find independence, and I think most likely the answer will be reinvigorating the innovative leadership that we had and bringing recycling where we had it in Las Colinas, and we're seeing it in Los Gatos, and we're seeing it in other places around California, reinvigorating our community where we can invest now in these projects. And I think 30 of them have been identified around our county, both in golf courses and San Quentin, potentially. There are many places where we can start the investment in recycled water. We can retake our leadership and become increasingly water independent. So I look forward to pushing that. I'm not walking away from the partnerships that we have up there. I think they're too critical, Steve.
Thanks, Jed. Matt, do you want to add anything to this?
Just a few short things. Those points were well taken by both. And so I don't have too much to add, but I do mirror what or echo what Jed was saying in terms of the Sonoma Valley partnership being critical for a whole litany of reasons. One, it's just a very good source of water. And I think there's going to be give and take, but I think the partnerships are looked at much like other items too on the water supply spectrum, recycled water, desal, increased storage. And where those partnerships, I think, would benefit the rate customer or the district itself, they should be explored. And I think that we should be able to use those partnerships when they make sense. Looking to the Central Valley water system and the state intertie puts us into a market where it's not always in our best case to negotiate from. And I don't think that's the best way to do business either, as opposed to looking to something like Sonoma, where there's a lot of mutual beneficial options that will help us get water for a much more reasonable price and be able to add into our resiliency once we add the additional items such as a reusable water, desalination, or potentially increased storage.
Good discussion, guys. Thank you. Baron Hamill, and then we'll go to a question that was on chat from Mary Helene.
Hi, thank you for taking my questions, and thank you all for stepping forward into the fray and being interested enough in the situation that we have here to put yourselves out there the way you are. I appreciate it, and I'm sure many others do as well. A couple of things. Desal has been on the table for a long time, as you well know, and some have identified the pipeline as not just a way to get water from East Bay mud during a crisis, but it's an opportunity potentially for us to become part of the bigger Bay Area accessing the desal plant that's up in Antioch, or will be. How do you feel about that versus having our own desal capability and all the inherent issues with that? And granted, desal is a long-term solution, there's no question. I've been on the case of golf courses in Marin. I'd like to see more attention paid to that excessive use of water for a limited number of people. So again, your comment about golf course as a massive water user in our area, especially when water gets tight. Thank you again for taking my question.
Jed, do you want to answer the question? I think you may have some knowledge about the golf courses.
Yes. So the first question about desal is how we would look at regional approach versus a localized our own approach. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then piping it across the bridge. I don't have a strong opinion on how Antioch could be helpful for us. I think that we've already proven that East Bay Mud is not necessarily a big fan of helping us solve our problems. They spent $1 billion over 30 years solving their problems, and now they're saying, okay, you guys over, you rich folks over in Marin are trying to come over and leverage that. But I do think that there are better opportunities for us in desal, either in the Petaluma River area, that could be interesting. But I once again, I feel like that's a long-term plan, and I'm not convinced that the technology in the short term is going to get us there. But I'm open to looking at that. I think that that's going to take some time to get through. I do think that on the golf course front, there are ways that you can actually use recycled water in multiple areas. I know Meadow Club is looking at it, and I talked to the head of their committee who's looking at doing a $10 million investment to bring water up to them. And I think we can partner with Meadow Club to do that. And similar at Peacock Gap, there's an opportunity for us to use recycled water to help with them. And I think there's an opportunity for us to potentially do that over by San Quentin and with the development that the state is doing over there, which is, I think, is a couple thousand units. There are ways that actually you can have recycled water and desal combined together, and you can kind of leverage the infrastructure that they could have near each other where it could be helpful. because building, multiple pipelines to go through to satisfy it would be expensive. But I have not seen a proposal for the right location for us that gives us the best bang for the buck at this point.
So that begs the question of tapping into the Antioch approach.
I think that could be potentially helpful as a emergency solution to get some amount of water that we might need. That would once again bring a pipeline across the bridge and be a pretty expensive investment. And I think there are better ways to have an emergency resiliency plan than that.
That in my thinking, and again, I welcome your comments, that's part of what I like the way it was mentioned, to do a phased approach. That yes, there's what I call the low-hanging fruit of conservation, and then there are the other approaches, and some of them would include the long-term solutions looking out 10 years plus.
Agreed.
Matt and Ranjiv, do you want to, maybe Matt first, do you want to add any
Sure.
thoughts you might have on that?
I think, the Antioch piece is really front and center, because when you have the governor come in front and talk about this as a real answer, I think it draws a lot of attention. But right now, the system itself is set up in a capacity that I don't think is ready to support outside of the East Bay area. I mean, it was really part and parcel designed to support the community of Antioch and potentially surrounding communities with some additional benefits should they want to expand it. But it wasn't designed to support additional supply especially over to Marin yet. So I think even if we did want to partner with that, we would still have to invest quite a bit of capital, not just in the plant itself, but in connecting our county to there. And again, that's going to be a little bit further off for that. But the recycled water piece, I think, still is very much untapped in terms of its full potential. The Los Colinas Valley Sanitary District had quite a big upgrade on their facility as they're going through a remodel, and the amount of water they're putting out there, or potentially can put out there, far exceeds the demand or the draw on it right now. And so if we can get that demand increased by the community, and actually real tangible projects that are usable, and not just, come with your big pickup truck that's a 4x4 and have a big, huge container and fill it with water. That's just a lot to ask of everyone to try to go out and buy one of those just so they can use the recycled water. But I think making it easier for the consumer is a big priority for me, because the system is set up in place there. And then my only fear in the big picture is that we're jumping on technology that's going to be legacy here soon if we can get direct potable recycled water. But I think there's enough time that it makes sense to continue the investment in the recycled water right now.
And Ranjiv, have you any thoughts, especially coming from the global perspective, or what you've seen going on in other places? Thanks, Barron.
I think it's a little maybe early to make a firm conclusion regarding the benefits of doing desal locally here in Marin versus doing it in cooperation with a regional initiative. Now, I think for the reasons already noted, I don't know that Antioch connecting to the Antioch system is under a lot of consideration right now, but I believe the current study is doing careful comparisons of the costs and benefits of running a desal operation independently here in Marin versus trying to do new development through regional cooperation. Now, some of the costs and benefits have already been noted. Not only the capital costs, but the operating costs of the desal facility are going to be quite high. So if we did that independently, we would have to cover those. If we did that in collaboration, obviously they'd be spread out. But on the other hand, moving water is probably the most expensive aspect of water supply. I think that's the highest consumption of energy, is actually moving water. So a desal plant that's at some distance from Marin could potentially incur costs that would make it less economically feasible than something that we did locally. So that's a lot to say that we should have the data on all of those options that allow us to make cost-benefit comparisons and guide a more informed decision, hopefully by the end of the year.
Thanks. I'd like to go to a question from Mary Helene that was on chat. She was asking about how integral is home conservation to the big picture. And let's start with you again, Matt.
I think home conservation will continue to be a component of the water supply piece. I think if you did away with that or didn't consider it, our water use would spike to the point where we really have to go searching more aggressively for a new supply. But the water supply piece does have, a limit. It's not going to be something you can constantly dial up to and get more and more and more without one pushback from the public or the rate customer, or just inability to conserve more. And I think we saw that a little bit over the summer and the spring. And I've got 2 girls at home and a dog, and we got down to 80 gallons of water per day in the winter. And I don't want to do much more at all than that. But it's also active versus passive conservation, which I mentioned earlier. And I think it's important for a couple of reasons. Active conservation, the district has to constantly message out the need for what's going on, constantly talk about the need to conserve, constantly make the public aware of the outcome of what's going on for that. And it takes over and over again repetition, as opposed to continuing technological advances into the home to allow for the passive part. So folks aren't actually thinking about it. They're just doing it and actually conserving, whether, it was the low flow shower head or toilet from years ago, or now more towards like a flume device or an AMI device as we move to the future. I think that's going to continue to strengthen the conservation portion of it all without actually upsetting quality of life to the point where, the pitchforks come to board meetings. So I think that's important. And I think the other part of it too, if we have a passive conservation effort, we have a much better understanding of the demand for the customer, as opposed to an active one where you see, highs and lulls of water use. And it's very difficult to predict budgets when we don't know how much product you're going to sell based on people's behaviors.
Thank you. Ranjit?
I think, I don't think we can underestimate the importance of conservation. I think it has to be part of our water management strategy going forward. But I think it's very difficult to promote conservation and avoid. In other words, consumers that are continually asked to conserve without seeing parallel efforts to diversify our water supplies so that at some point there is a limit to conservation is critical. I also don't think we can conserve our way out of a drought. If the drought goes on long enough, we might buy a few extra months, but clearly that's not gonna be enough. And so conservation in conjunction with water supply diversification is I think critical.
Yeah, I definitely heard quotes that like, hey, the MMWD has squeezed enough out of us. They can't squeeze any more water out of us. We've done is too much. It's too painful. And I understand the perspective. And I think the vast majority of our citizens have been fantastic. I think people have recognized the importance of saving water. 75% of our community is in tier 1. Tier 1's a pretty broad range. I think there's a chance we could probably actually separate tier 1 into 2 tiers. But I actually, or another way to say it is, I think we could probably create a tier 5, and I have started looking into that because I got some data just the other day from a good friend who was involved with some of the citizens group in MMWD about 10 years ago, that the top 100 households in Tiburon use on average 4,000 gallons a day. And the top 1,000 in that area use on average 750 gallons of water per day. So to say that we've squeezed enough out of our community, to me, doesn't totally jive. I think that there's still some communication and some reset that we need to have, that waste is happening. Most people, let's call it 75% who are in tier 1, are doing an absolutely fantastic job. And there's definitely some more room to grow and to improve. And I think that can be helpful. It won't solve the problem. It's not going to be the only answer. We need to have a multi-tiered answer. And some of the sources that we've talked about, both increasing storage and increasing supply from other areas. But it is a critical part of how we will get through this, is educating people about the impact of their decisions. And it's something that I've done for years in my companies that have been involved in sustainable focused products that help people understand the importance of using organics, of not using chemicals in your laundry detergents and putting on your countertops and on your skin, to saving energy so you can reduce carbon emissions. You can make decisions that can be helpful for the community, save money, and be beneficial. And I think with the right communication plan, conservation can turn from being what seems to be a negative right now to being a positive. And it doesn't have to be for everybody, but I think we can continue to do better.
Thank you. I think that Steve Moore, one of our advisors, made the point that we learned how to recycle plastics, the ethics of recycling plastics, and now we can learn the recycling ethics of water. We do have a question from, I'm sorry, I can't read my own scribbles, Lorraine Lipsy, and then we'll go to James Krapewski's question. If you guys could discuss recycling and the possibilities of providing purple pipe to residents. Maybe one of you has some knowledge on this, and we can just maybe have one answer and go from there. Does someone want to answer this? Or I'll be like the teacher and assign you the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to take a shot if you want.
Okay.
Is that the full question, Christy? Yeah.
Yeah.
So listen, I think laying down purple pipe, if we could almost talk about it like we've talked about desal, there's pluses and minuses. The pluses are quite astonishing. The positive impact in many ways for the environment is large. The ability for us to be self-reliant is important. Countries all around the world are recycling water in a fantastic way. We don't have the culture here, and we can rebuild it, and we can rebuild it piecemeal over time. Some of the drawbacks are it is expensive to lay down more infrastructure into the streets, and we're already way behind. We have hundreds of millions of dollars in backlogged infrastructure that we need to catch up on. And it is costly. It's more expensive than some of the other solutions that are out there. But I think we got to start now, and it will be one of the things that I promote pretty heavily. We need to start reinvigorating our investment. We need to bring in an innovative view about how to go about it. We were innovators in the 80s when we put it in Las Colinas, and I think we should be doing it again now. It's about diversifying our portfolio so that we're not completely just reliant on Sonoma and on rain. And I look forward to partnering with folks like Steve Moore and others who are thought leaders about this.
Ranjiv or Matt, do you want to add anything to that, or should we go to the next question?
If I, Christy, just add real quickly that, to Jed's point, I think that the first purple pipe went in the late 80s in this county, or after Loma Prieta. And part of it too was to build a redundant fire hydrant supply should the earthquake affect the plumbing like it did in San Francisco. So there's benefits to it, but I feel like it just hasn't been moved on aggressively. And I think it goes right back to the culture of accepting it. But now we're at a place where it's time to push a lot more on the accelerator on this one.
Ranjiv, any other thoughts?
I think we're good there.
Okay. James Krapewski, I'm not saying your name correctly. My apologies. Do you want to ask your question?
Hi, thank you. My question is, what do you think of the water district's communications, or what would you do to improve the water district's communications? One of the areas that concerns me is that there's really been no discussion with the public of what the end point of conservation should be, what Marin should look like, for example. There's just been sort of an imposition drip by drip of, or should I say the opposite of that, the imposition of controls on our water use. So my question has to do with what's the sort of pattern of communications coming out of the district. And in another area that relates to that is, as most of you know, some long time ago, Director Kohler said that there had never been rationing in Marin during her time on the board. So I asked her a question, ultimately, what is her definition of rationing, and where did she get the definition from? Because I couldn't find anything that remotely resembled what she was talking about. I've never had an answer from her. So I've spoken up at the beginning of each board meeting, as you all know, and I still don't have an answer. But what's with the communication, and what would you answer a question like that? And the third part is, what would you do with the website? When I started looking at this back months ago, it was very, very difficult to find things on the website in any organized manner. To find basic data, it was sort of scattered here and there. It was a report here and there. And so would you make changes in the website? That's my questions.
Ranjiv, do you want to start?
James, your question about communication it really hits home with me, because I decided to run for a board position when I realized in March that the board had gone against a staff recommendation to put a measure on the June ballot to allow for voter approval to allow renewed investigation of desal as a water supply opportunity. I just thought that was, at the time, that to not put that back to voters at that time was very concerning, and I didn't understand why. But that wasn't actually the trigger for me. The trigger was the discussion in the board meeting, and my opponent, Larry Bregman, said, well, it would be really confusing for voters if we went ahead with this, because they're not really sure. There's a couple of, there was Proposition T that failed, Proposition S that passed, and voters wouldn't really be sure about what they're voting for here. So, we're not going to put it on the ballot. And the job of the board is to provide information to the voters in a way that's not confusing, in a way that they can understand, in a way that we can understand how decisions are made, and in a way that's fully transparent. And that was what eventually decided, that was the decision point for me, that I need to get, involved and see if we can do this better. So as you've gathered, I'm really concerned about the quality of communication by that board. And I think that's one area that we can absolutely improve if given the chance. I will let, I know you had another question about the website. I'll let others address that one.
Jed or Matt, do you want to talk about the website or other issues on communication?
Well, this communication is going to be critical for success in our job and getting in the seat here. And I hope it's going to be a positive message. I hope that we can help people understand the impact that they can have, that as a community, we can rise together. As a community, we can help make a difference. And then it's going to take all of us. It's not one person or one board member or this board. It's everybody together. And a good organization, a well-run organization, is a listening organization. It's one where you take the feedback, you don't think that you have all the answers, and then you try to coalesce it and drive together. And if it's done right, then leadership and management becomes natural as opposed to forced, where there's silos of communication and things aren't shared and good ideas are not bubbled to the top. I think specifically, MMWD has a communications issue for a number of reasons. One is they lost their head of marketing, their head of communications about a year ago. And that's a sign that that person left because of disagreements with other people internally, but also because it does not seem to be the best atmosphere internally for folks. And now we have actually several dozen open seats. I think the culture inside the organization needs to be revitalized. And the marketing side of it is a classic one. I gather we had a pretty strong person in the seat who did not want to work there anymore. So we need some leadership here where we build a listening organization, not to our community, but to our staff, because the skills are there and can be there. And I think we can bring them in. I think we can use the bill to be the primary communication mechanism. The website's good and it can be better. But the bill is where we can really articulate why we have certain fixed costs, that we're not just here to deliver drips of water to your faucet, but we have 2 million people using the watershed, and we have rangers that are taking care of it. And we have 5 endangered species and 400 plants and fauna. We have hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure pipeline. So it's not just a direct variable cost that is driving the financial structure here. There's a lot of fixed costs that are important that are a part of it. So I think there are multiple ways we can go about it. Specifically to your question about rationing, I mean, rationing is pretty clear, and this organization is not doing it. Rationing says you only get a specific amount of, in this case, it'd be water or any commodity, and that's it. And so rationing is not happening. And I don't see it happening, and hopefully we'll avoid it from happening. There are places in Southern California where they're turning folks off, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that does not happen here. I'm not sure why it was difficult for her to answer that question. It's not a difficult question to answer.
And Matt, do you want to add anything to this? I mean, very interesting.
Well, I think in terms of the communication piece, I think the important thing is having something to communicate. And that's been part of the challenge, because there's been no leadership in terms of establishing where we want to be as a goal. And if you don't have that goal to be able to communicate out, you really don't have too much to say. And I think that the ratepayers, the district overall, if we don't know where the board's trying to take us, especially, from organizational standpoint, but as a ratepayer, we don't understand what the end result is, and we can't help get there. We don't know what the point is. It's very difficult to understand anything at all. And then when you have a rate cycle that's bi-monthly or every other month, you don't get a touch all the time. It's something that comes every 60 days, which is a really hard way to communicate, especially when we're dealing with current drought conditions right now.
You're muted, Christy.
Hey, Chuck, do you have a question?
I'd just like to go to a couple questions in chat first, Chuck.
Okay.
And then we've got about 20 minutes left, and I know some of you have to leave. Eileen Mougeot, again, apologies for your last name. Maybe Jed, you can answer, not your last name, the way I pronounce it. Jed, maybe you could start on the answer. This one, the state has mandated more housing in all our communities, but how do we supply water to all this new housing? And that question came up later from someone else as well.
Got it. Well, I think it's fortunately, it's not our job to decide whether we have housing or not and where the housing goes. That's a state mandate, and that's being heavily contested in different municipalities and embraced by others. Our job is to supply water to people in our community, and so that the extra use that will come with such housing will be our job to make sure that we get water to those people. That is my answer.
Matt or Ranjiv?
I think I agree with the perspective of we don't regulate the growth of the community. That's for elected officials, and thank goodness, because that's a much more difficult job than actually finding the water. But understanding what the impacts are going to be and then help build that into the process of establishing a water supply is important. I think it's also important to understand what the impact is going to be. So with this housing numbers, the majority of the communities that are taking the first step for that have looked at multifamily housing. And when you look at multifamily housing, the actual water use is substantially low than what you get from a single family home. And we have some really good opportunities with new construction to bring in purple pipe and put in some newer technology that really limits that. So I think looking at the overall draw, it's much lower than I think people would expect. So there's some real opportunity to just add those numbers into the current water supply demand and help support the community decisions from their elected.
And Ranjiv, any other thoughts on that?
I agree that the water supplier is not responsible for managing housing and housing development requirements. The water supply, given this situation, if that state mandates remains in place, that increases the urgency on MMWD to establish additional water supplies, ideally that are drought resistant. It just increases the urgency with which we've got to move forward with expanding and diversifying our water supply. It is already a highly urgent situation. It is already critical. It just means we have to move even faster. We have to obviously understand what our targets are. Is it 3 years of available supply at all times, given the additional 14,004 houses that are projected? then that's what we have to shoot for. But we just have to move very aggressively.
Okay, thank you, guys. Eileen said that, Eileen, I don't know if you're willing to go unmute yourself to say why this is not answering your question. If not, we will just move on. Do you want
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I wasn't asking if you approved of the mandate, with all due respect. Mandate is the mandate. If it's there. And so I'd like to know how our board, and Ranjiv, you did kind of answer that, so thank you. But I'm not questioning whether, I expect you guys to go to the state and go to bat for the mandate. That's not at all my question, because it's there. My question is, and Ranjiv, you did answer that somewhat, so thank you. And Matt, you did too a little bit. But I mean, we have this issue. And what I'm reading is studies where they say this new housing, I don't understand how they say it's not going to affect our supply. I mean, that just makes no sense at all when they say, well, we're going to conserve our way into this. That's not possible if you add that many housing, that many units.
Yeah, I think it's about 10%, right?
I don't have the numbers in
Yeah, I
front of me.
think it's about 10% increase. So that means that's another 10% that we need to go find water for. Sorry if you feel like I didn't answer it, but and actually, I think it may not be 10% because of what Matt said. There are some new construction policies that I would be in favor of that can increase, but either whether it's gray water use or storage or stormwater capture or the kind of housing that's being built, that I believe would make that 10% impact on our water supply needs less.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just was hoping to hear from you guys, what your ideas were when we add all this housing, where this water is supposed to come from. Not in questioning about the mandate itself, but where we were getting this water, other than we just have to use less, those of us who already have water. That was sort of my intent of the question. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And here's a question from Rena to everyone, actually, and also from SL Park. What do you think about the aging infrastructure and the amount of water that is wasted that way? Ranjiv?
I believe we lose about 11% of our water to leaks and some, non-payment of bills. That's actually a pretty good number for most water suppliers. I suspect that the state is going to start to push for a higher bar and trying to get water suppliers to come in at about 5% lost to leaks and non-payment. If we could reduce our losses by 5%, that would be one step towards a more sustainable supply. Now, we do have infrastructure challenges here at MMWD because of the assembly of a lot of different systems that were developed over a long time ago using different practices and materials. It's also a difficult geography, so we have extensive pipelines. I think we have almost as much as East Bay Mud, although we serve a much smaller population. So this again comes back to my argument for why we can use why we need technology to help us identify the most vulnerable areas and focus on and prioritize those. And I think advanced metering can really facilitate that.
Matt, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think, the number unfortunately is an industry standard, the leak piece, and we actually do quite well on that. But I think back to earlier points is that as we start looking at increased revenue or the ability to borrow or finance things, one of the highest priorities should be the infrastructure upgrades to make sure that we're getting the most out of our current system and preventing any future failures.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Now I'm going to ask a question that was someone asked me to ask you, and that would be, what do you plan to do in your first 100 days in office? And let's start with, who wants to start? Go ahead, Matt. You're Division 1.
Okay. So I think, fortunately, and I say fortunately because it's going to be a lot to look at in the first 100 days because of the way the current Jacob study has been elongated a little bit, and I think for a good reason too. But right off the bat, we're going to be looking at a recreational use management plan. That's going to be a hot topic for a few folks throughout the county, and a lot of people that are passionate in. But I think where the real first building block comes out of is the rate structure and how we're gonna have to be looking at the rates that will take effect July 1 of 23. And that's going to be informed by the water supply issue. So these things are all coming together, much like a Venn diagram, and that center is where we really want to concentrate and start establishing right away where we want to get to, and then using the water supply piece and then the rate structure talks and all the additional exercises that go along with those to get us where we need to be. And if we're still, our head's still above water at that point, we can start looking at the recreational use management plan. But that would be my first two priorities, first 100 days in office.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And we'll go in order again. Ranjiv, Division 3.
Everything that we need to do in order to bring MMWD out of this cycle of water shortages and towards a new vision of never being in a position of running out of water is going to be highly controversial within Marin. We know that every water supply solution that we're going to propose is going to have proponents and opponents fighting it out. Issues around rates are going to be, they have been very controversial. They will continue to be so. So I feel that in my first 100 days, the number one priority will be to try to bring all stakeholders to the table to reestablish a joint vision for what we think MMWD could and should be. That's how MMWD was started. Leaders brought the citizens of Marin together to invest in a massive amount of infrastructure that we are benefiting from now 100 years later. It's a luxury to be able to debate the pros and cons of desal when we have 7 reservoirs that were built by our predecessors. We need to come back to the mentality of working together to establish something that is going to benefit citizens of Marin 100 years from now. We have to recognize that we need to put some of our differences aside in order to achieve that. And so in my first 100 days, my number one priority would be to try to bring all of the different groups that are going to be actively engaged in every solution discussion, every rate discussion, to say, can we find a way to work together to achieve progress?
Yeah, well said. I think that what I am not seeing right now and what we need to make any of these decisions is a very clear plan. We need a financial plan that's forward-looking. We need a supply plan that handles the needs of our community, whether it's housing or others. We need a use plan. And right now, I do not see that. I see more piecemeal decision-making. And so without that clear target, short, medium, and long term, it's very hard to think ahead. So I would step back. In the first 100 days, we have an opportunity to rebuild a listening organization, to one that brings, as Ranjiv said, members of our community together. The last company that I was CEO of had about the same number of people, it was about 250 people. And I did lunch with Jed with every single person in the organization. We did 10-person lunches, and I went around the table and I said, what's keeping you up at night and how can I help? Who are you and what do you do? But I learned from those 25 lunches what the issues were, where the strengths and weaknesses in the organization were, and where the solutions needed to come out of. And I came out of that with a very, very clear strategy. The ideas are out there. We already probably have them inside our community and inside the organization. We just need the political will to go make it happen. And there's going to be some difficult decisions that are going to be made. I think when the three of us are in the seat, we're prepared to take it on the chin, because we know that there's going to be some people that don't like every decision that has to get made. But right now we're too stuck, that the inertia has got us into a bit of a rough place. As Matt said, the core key decisions that are going to become apparent will revolve around the recreation plan and the rate structure. And there's been some political timid approaches to both of those over time. And I think that I believe that the three of us will have an opportunity to make a difference.
I think that's a wonderful, great summation of what you all have in mind. I don't see any other hands raised. Anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, I'm raising my hand, Christy.
Okay.
I've got a think
it went up and
outside.
down. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I've got to think outside the box for you guys. You may have heard a version of this, but there's been a lot in the news lately about the incredible variation in the weather these days. It's either raining and flooding or it's drought. And some people even predict California could be hit by a mega flood. Now, whenever I go up to Jenner, see the Russian River or see water flow down, my question is, it drives me crazy because all this fresh water from the sky is coming down to Marin and it's flowing into the ocean besides our watershed. So my question is, thinking ahead, long-term planning, do you three have any ideas how we could better harness all these mountains of water that's going into our bay and ocean?
Matt, you've been paying a lot of attention to the watershed. Do you want to start there? Start on Chuck's question.
Sure. I think that the technology and the interest and the attention being paid to like a massive stormwater capture type system is starting to really gain steam throughout the state. It doesn't hurt, again, when the governor says that's an area where he would like the state to start concentrating on. But understanding too that a lot of the stormwater is part of the natural ecosystem, and it supports a lot of whether it's an animal habitat or a fish habitat or does a few different other things to the environment itself, that a lot of that water needs to continue doing what it's doing, so that we don't lose a lot of the other aspects of what we got in terms of the watershed quality and the ability to continue having water from there. But I think as we learn to capture water more, I think there's some really innovative thinking going on, and we can start doing some really interesting projects. Where I work right now, currently in South San Francisco, there's a drainage canal going through town that picks up water along the town of Colma through South San Francisco and then empties to the bay just north of the airport. In partnership with Caltrans to help reduce the amount of trash and runoff into the bay from the freeway system and the areas in the roadways. Our Central Park in South San Francisco was just dug up about 30 feet deep, the size of a couple of football fields. And now the creek is being diverted through this catchment during the winter time. Water is being cleaned out of large scale debris. Water is being stored for irrigation purposes, and the rest returns into the creek at a flow rate that still maintains the natural habitat all the way out to the bay. And now, granted, it's a pretty big project, but we start looking at like that, and all of a sudden, a few of those start adding up, and we can get a few wins to add to that water supply portfolio that we keep trying to get to once we have an established goal of which to meet for water.
Ranjiv?
Chuck, I really hope that a cost benefit analysis of stormwater capture would promote it as a viable strategy for increasing our water supply here in Marin. I'm sure you're aware of the environmental requirements for water release in rivers and streams, which actually really also impacts our ability to expand our reservoir capacities because we have to maintain our compliance with Fish and Game for water release. So I would really hope that a good cost benefit analysis would make it a viable solution to pursue. I haven't seen that data yet. I think it would be interesting to collect. I'll throw out one caution story. I work a lot in Singapore, and if you've spent time there, it rains every day at 3 o'clock. And despite that, constant rain, they have had to diversify. They're the leaders in wastewater recycling and water reuse, wastewater reuse for potable purposes, as well as desalination. So because their ability to capture enough of that water and store it, and ultimately is limited by their geography and by their infrastructure. So, that hasn't proven to be, sort of the overarching solution for Singapore. I hope it would be the case for Marin, but I just don't have the data for that.
Yeah, I think we have 7 dams on Lagunitas Creek, and our reservoirs are not sufficient to satisfy our needs. The pushback the sense that I get is that increasing our capacity here is going to be difficult. But as Ranjiv said, I want to dig into that. I'm not willing to say that we can't, and I'm not willing to say that we can come up with alternative creative solutions to increase our capacity in a way that is not harmful for fish and wildlife and for the environment. So I look forward to digging into what the real pushback would be from the state. But the sense that I get, and this has been talking with Jared and some other folks, is that it's going to be really, really difficult for us in Marin to increase the capacity significantly. Maybe spill water gates, but that's not going to help a ton. I do think, though, however, that as you talked about up in Jenner, I do think that the Russian River winter water is a significant opportunity for us, because that is just flowing straight out. And their watershed is significantly bigger than ours. I think it's like 4 or 5 times larger than us. So the opportunity to catch the storm that's coming through, to catch that torrential rain that happens, is bigger by having a stronger partnership with them up there. And there are opportunities for us to expand our storage access by capturing winter rains through the Russian River watershed. And so I like I said, I'll lock arms with anyone I can to help make sure that we can partner and take advantage of that.
Thanks, Jed.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's time that we all kind of move on to our next events for the evening. But I'm really heartened by all 3 of you. And I think that I know you're not running as a slate, but individually, I just cannot imagine how wonderful the team you would bring to the water district would be. And one of the things I've been looking for since I first got started in this is the creativity that is so predominant in Marin, and intelligence and creativity. And I think all 3 of you have that. And that is one of the reasons that we did endorse all 3 of you. And we wish you all the very best. I would like to ask all of our attendees to be sure to vote. It's not an election. I mean, most of the time, these kinds of, the water board, who cares? Well, don't do that this time. That's critical. Don't vote for the incumbent this time. That's critical. We've had 2 of those incumbents have been on the board for a long time, and we still have a lot of problems. So thanks everyone for coming. I wish all Matt and—
I could add one thing, Christy.
Of course, Jack.
I always like to add one thing. Now we do have a group of 40 or so members here, and you've been following us for a year. It's the time for you guys to start acting and talk to your neighbors. We've gotten notes on the website that some of you want to do some campaigning. So that's what this meeting's about. Take action if you can. This is a big time for call for action. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. And Jed, I hope your daughter wins the meet.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your support.
Take care.
Check out all of our
Appreciate the time.
websites. Sign up.
Bye.
We could use your help.
All right. Take care.